Okay, good morning and welcome. Welcome to our first Mesa State Community College Transfer Summit. My name is Dr. Nicole Traeger. I am the Mesa Director at Los Medanos College, and I will be your cruise director today. So we are so glad to have you. We'll be recording this session. And I will give you a little introduction before we go into our main speaker today. First, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. As we gather for this meeting, we are physically dispersed and virtually connected. I'd like to take a moment for us to reflect on the meaning of place, and doing so recognize the various traditional lands that we are on, especially in California, as we congregate today. We want to acknowledge our elders, past, present, and emerging, of all of the land we work and live on with gratitude and respect. If you would like to research the native territory lands near you, you can do so at native-land.ca. I personally live on the land of the Bay Miwoks, which is in the shadow of Mount Diablo. So I encourage you to look into the land that you live on. I would also like to give thanks to the Mesa Transfer Summit Committee that worked on this event, and give a shout out to each and every one. As I mentioned, I am here from the Los Medanos College, and I just want to give a couple of notations about each and every one of these people. I personally, one interesting fact about me, I volunteered for the original Pfizer vaccine trial starting in the summer of last year. Gisela Spieler is the program director at Rio Hondo Community College, and she knows how to yodel.
That is so not true. I know how to ski.
Amy Foote is the program director at College of the Canyons, and she loves rap and used to break dance in the day on the linoleum in her carport with all of the neighborhood kids. Kelly Horner is the program director at Cabrillo College, and Kelly has played soccer for about 30 years of her life. Luis is the program director at Napa Valley College, and he has had the opportunity to swim with manta rays in the Flores Sea of Indonesia. And last but not least, Michael Carney is the program director at Consumnes River College, and they told his paternal grandfather, John, that he was named after him, but nobody ever told him that John is his middle name and not his first name. So this is the committee that has brought you today, but I also want to recognize all of the wonderful Mesa directors out there in California that have supported you throughout the years, but also supported this Transfer Summit. We could not have done it without them, as well as they have helped to bring together students and alumni for today. And thank you for being here. I also wanted to mention the agenda today. I know lots of people got a lot of emails, or maybe your emails went to spam, and I am really happy that you are here today. We are doing our opening right now. And then after that, we will hear from Rachel Anicetti, who is going to talk about, I received my financial award letter, now what? So she's going to talk about financial aid and the transfer process, and you'll be hearing about how financial aid is different at your four-year university and be able to ask some questions. Then we will have 3 breakout sessions. You each got an individual email of your breakout sessions and links to those. I know some of you are interested in specific colleges, so we paired you with those specific colleges, but we also paired you with some other colleges so that you can explore. Sometimes your financial aid comes back from your favorite college, and it's maybe not what you expected, and you might want to explore some of your backup universities, some that you might not have been thinking of. So this is an opportunity for you to hear from alumni at this earlier date and talk to them and hear what it's like at their university, because all of these universities in California are wonderful, and we have wonderful alumni here to talk to you about their university. So in between each session, there's a 5-minute break. There's one a little bit longer for you to stretch, use the restroom, find your link, and make it to the next session. They'll end at 12:35. There is a closing and a raffle. You must be present to partake in the raffle. We have some awesome gift cards, maybe some Mesa swag. We will also be talking about our second transfer summer session, which will happen in the summer. This is the first of 2 sessions. We'll have a second one, which will have a different focus and a different schedule. Once you've accepted your university, we want to get you together with other people that have accepted that university. So we'll talk about that at our closing session. And with that, I would like to welcome Rachel Anicetti from Los Medanos College. She is the Director of Transfer and Career, and she will be talking to you about, now I've received my award letter, what do I do with it? So I will stop sharing my screen and
Nicole?
Welcome Rachel.
Nicole, will you start recording? Oh, you are recording already.
I'm recording.
Hey everybody, good morning. How are you? I will start sharing my screen. Perfect. And just to double check, can everyone see the PowerPoint slides okay? Awesome. And I will make sure I can see your faces. There we go. All right. Hello, thank you, Dr. Traeger, so much for inviting me, and the MESA team. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I am so excited to speak with you all. Hey, silver linings of a pandemic, right? We all get to see each other in ways that we normally wouldn't be able to. I am here today because you all are kind of in this huge phase of transition in your life, right? You are wrapping up community college, you're figuring out what your next steps are, and how to navigate financial aid and money is like a huge part of that, right? It can either be a huge stressor or a huge stress reliever. So financial aid and transfer, it's a game, and knowing kind of like what kind of playing pieces are on the board and what puzzle pieces you have to work with and how to navigate this can really kind of change what your pathway looks like into the next year. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Rachel Anicetti. I'm the Director of Transfer and Career at Los Medanos College. I've been working in the community college system since 2015, but I have been working within higher education and specifically on college admissions for the last 10, 12 years. So my background is actually in social work. And so I think that really influences how I think about higher education, right? I think higher education is one of those great privileges in our life that we can pursue to really change the path of our life, our community, our families. And my area of specialty really in working with college admission and within college admissions is working with folks who are undocumented, first in their family to go to college. And, college is complicated enough, and sometimes life layers onto it and makes it a little more complicated. And that's where I come in. So let's get started. First, take a breath. You got this. Yeah. How are you? You are, I think, we need to put your transitions into context right now, and just, you need to acknowledge how badass you are. You are graduating, you are transferring, you are experiencing uncertainty on top of uncertainty because pandemic, and changes upon changes. And it's okay to kind of acknowledge that and to feel those feelings. So we're going to be not putting that to the side, but kind of talking about the intersection of these things. We'll talk about the future in three ways. What we know, what you have control over, what we might not know right now, but what we can anticipate, and how we can prepare with the least amount of risk to you financially. Sound good? And I'm also going to make sure, there we go. I can see my chat now, just in case anybody needs to. You are more than welcome to send questions out in the chat to everyone or private to me, and I'll try to incorporate them in what I'm saying, okay? So even though we're talking about your financial aid award letter specifically, I think it's important to start with just how financial aid works within higher education. And we're going to specifically talk about California colleges. Every state approaches financial aid a little bit differently. So we'll be talking about California colleges here, and mostly talking about California public institutions here, but we'll address out-of-state schools or private institutions a little bit as well. So I think what I want everyone to know kind of from this slide is that financial aid is an umbrella term. When someone says financial aid, what we're actually talking about is a bunch of different types of financial assistance that helps you cover the costs of college. So kind of in big categories, there's free money that doesn't need to be repaid and borrowed money that is repaid with interest. Free money is when you hear terms like grants, work study, scholarships, those are things that do not need to be paid back. When you hear loans, that is something that does need to be paid back. We'll be talking about loans in a little bit. Loans are not scary. They're just another kind of tool in your toolbox. The other kind of definitions that go into financial aid that you might be hearing are gift aid or self-help aid. So gift aid means that it is, here, these are these dollars. We want you to have them to go to school. We don't want anything back in return. You can get gift aid in two different ways. One is merit-based. That means that you did something to earn it. So that could be that you applied for a scholarship. Thanks. That means that you did something within your academic achievements or your artistic or athletic talent, your community service, your leadership. You did something to warrant that money. The other definition is need-based gift aid, and that means that they think you need money to go to school and you get that money. Done. And that's based off of your or your family's finances. And then there's self-help aid, which is another way to think about loans or work study. We'll talk about work study in a little bit too. And Tina, I see your question as well, so we'll talk about that. So let me see, can you raise your hand or do a thumbs up if you have started to receive or see financial aid award letters from the colleges that you applied to? Okay, cool. So one of the things that's going to immediately kind of probably stand out to you is that you're going to see things there called cost of attendance. Is that right? And cost of attendance is really scary because it's the first thing they put on your financial aid award letter, and it looks like a huge bill. When someone says cost of attendance, they're actually grouping in a bunch of different costs altogether. So cost of attendance for a college is the tuition, right? What we all think of, but it's also estimated fees, estimated cost of books for that school, transportation, room and board, the estimated personal expenses of the average student at that school, and estimated supplies. It's a formula, and it's a federally based or state-based formula. Cost of attendance for California community colleges on average are around $13,000 per year. So just think of it that way. Like, do you actually pay $13,000 right now to go to community college per year? You might, but it doesn't feel like it, right? Because it's kind of broken down into the other ways that you define your living expenses. So think about that for your transfer institutions as well. We have a question about, is meal plans included in cost of attendance? And it depends on how you filled out your financial aid application, your FAFSA or your California DREAM Act. If you said that you would be living on campus, then sometimes they'll automatically include it, but not always. From there, they'll then subtract family contributions. Family contributions is also known as your EFC, your estimated family contributions. And so that is if you are considered a dependent student, that is based on your parent or legal guardian's income. If you are an independent student, that is based on your own income. And we can talk about that too. And so that equals your financial need. I think looking at this, oh, and by the way, I sent these slides to Dr. Traeger. I'm sure you'll be getting them, but take screenshots along the way if helpful. Because all this goes into what I like to look at. I'm a visual person. I think visuals are helpful. When I visualize your financial aid, I think of a bucket. So this is the financial aid bucket. The size of the bucket is dependent on this cost of attendance. The bigger the cost of attendance, the bigger the bucket that needs to be filled. Okay. The first layer of the bucket is going to be that EFC, that estimated family contribution. The number of that is going to be based on what you entered into your financial aid applications. So either your FAFSA, if you're filling out the FAFSA, your DREAM Act application, if you're filling out the DREAM Act application. And yes, you can absolutely change what your housing status is, and it doesn't have a huge impact on what kind of financial aid you receive. So the gap that remains is called your estimated need or your financial need. Let's talk about dependency just really quickly, because some of you may have started encountering this at community college, but some of you maybe have not yet. So the higher education financial aid systems define dependency differently than taxes or that kind of thing. So dependency is mostly age-based. If you are under the age of 23, you are typically considered a dependent student. That means that they'll be looking at your parent or your legal guardian's income information. If you're 23 or over when you're filling out your financial aid applications, you're automatically, no matter what, considered an independent student. So that means if you still live at home and your income is zero, but you are 23 years old or older, then they're only going to be looking at your income. And so that could mean zero. Under the age of 23, you can still be considered an independent student if you qualify as a military veteran or active military. If you are married, if you have legal dependents of your own, like children, or you're the legal guardian for someone, if you've been homeless in the last year, or if you have been in the foster care system at any point since age 16. So from there, then they start looking at what kind of federal grants and scholarships or institutional or foundation grants and scholarships you're eligible for. We're going to look at what types those are. It's not just, one grant or one scholarship that's going to be in the bucket. It's going to be a bunch of different ones that kind of all add up to fill in a little bit more, a little bit more. Most of this information will come from your FAFSA or your DREAM Act. Sometimes schools will ask for an additional application after the fact. And then finally, this will look different for everyone. Some folks, their financial aid bucket is filled up just from your EFC federal and state grants and scholarships, and institutional or foundation scholarships. And then your bucket is full. Sometimes though, you might have space left over. And so for that, that's when schools start adding in work study, or they start adding in loans. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. Just to touch, because as we see this kind of as a whole, there's a couple things that I want to point out. One is that EFC can sometimes be accurate and can sometimes not be accurate. I think you may have seen this already at the community college level. Sometimes your estimated family contribution will be 0. And so this will be nothing in the bucket. Sometimes based on your income for that year, it will look like $10,000, and that may or may not be realistic. Just know that that's normal. Just because they have this estimated EFC in your financial aid award letter, that doesn't mean you're going to be getting a bill for that number. It's just it's just kind of information for you for how they estimated what kind of financial need you had. Any other questions looking at this? Oh, I think I'm going to answer Tina's question now. So some folks have saved money already for transfer. Some of you also may be applying for a number of scholarships to help try to address these EFC costs, or if there was, if you don't want to take out loans and are trying to fill up this bucket with scholarships instead of loans, how does that impact the bucket? And the answer is it depends. One is typically if you have a savings account like a 529, or if you have a savings that are specifically for your college, you may or may not have put that into your FAFSA or your DREAM Act applications. Each school kind of approaches that differently. I'm going to be talking about this at the very end, but making friends with your financial aid office at your new school now will be helpful for you. It will cut down on any surprises that you receive, and they can kind of help you address how to talk about like your savings accounts specifically. And then for scholarships can impact the bucket in 2 different ways, and it depends on how the scholarship is distributed to you. Some scholarships decide to distribute scholarship money and awards directly to you, the student. And if that's the case, then the school will not necessarily know about them, and it will not be impacting your financial aid bucket. Other scholarships distribute the award directly to the school instead of to you. And if that's the case, then schools approach it in different ways. Sometimes they use that to reduce the number of loans that they're offering. Sometimes it doesn't impact the bucket at all. And sometimes it will make the bucket overflow. So then they'll be usually working on reducing the amount of work study or loans that they're offering instead. And the very last thing that they try to do is they try to never touch your federal or state grants or scholarships if they can help it. Alejandro, your question about age and dependency status is you don't have to worry about whether you're marking yourself independent or dependent. The FAFSA will navigate that for you, and same with the DREAM Act. So that list of questions that you always fill out when you're filling out the FAFSA or California DREAM Act, where it's, what's your age, do you qualify for any of these things, that's determining dependency status. So they'll figure it out for you. And then the Blue and Gold program we'll talk about too. So the UCs, if you don't know, they kind of have an advertising campaign for their financial aid called the Blue and Gold Plan. And that is if your family income, if you're dependent, or if you're independent, your own income is lower than $80,000, that they guarantee that your tuition and fees will be completely covered. And we'll be looking at that.
Rachel,
yes.
Did they change the age from 24 to 23 for independent students?
I don't know. Does anybody know?
Because I just looked it up and I've always known it's 24.
It's 24 from what I know.
It's 24. It also, they'll be looking at the age that you're turning when you enter that institution. So if you're 23 now, but you're going to be turning 24 that first year, that's kind of what they base it off of.
Oh, so if you're turning 24 in the fall of 21, 2021, then you're actually independent for that whole academic year.
That's my
Yeah.
understanding.
That's what I understand too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so sorry. That's usually why I bring up age 23.
Got it.
Okay. This mostly is just kind of context for you, because when you receive your financial aid award letter, you're going to be seeing all these different names of grants and scholarships. You're going to be seeing things like the Pell Grant and the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, work study, loans, and loans with different names. You might see Stafford Loan or Perkins Loan. You might see the Middle Class Scholarship or the State University Grant. This is just to tell you that this is how colleges fill your buckets. They have funding sources from a variety of places, from the federal government, from the state of California, from their own college. And these are the different things that they use to build your financial aid package. And now let's talk about loans. So I put this in an asterisk in a previous slide, but I didn't really get a chance to address it in full. One thing that I want to make sure folks know that we're talking about is right now we're talking about financial aid as it impacts your undergraduate education. So for you getting your bachelor's degree, financial aid works differently after you graduate with your bachelor's degree, as you're looking at postgraduate school or graduate school, doctorate programs, PhD or MD programs. The types of financial aid that are available to you and how people pay for programs after their bachelor's degrees, it changes drastically. You may be looking at PhD programs where they are fully covering the cost of your education and giving you a living stipend. You may be looking at programs where they will not be covering those costs and you'll mostly be taking out loans. Most grants and scholarships that we're talking about now and that were on the previous slide, those are only available to folks that are getting their bachelor's degree. And they would not be available for folks that are getting their master's or their doctoral degrees. So it will be something that you will do more research on as you're entering this, your junior year, your senior year at your transfer institution. So what I really recommend as far as loans go is to start with this website and start becoming really familiar with this website. Studentaid.gov is the federal website for financial aid. Their resources and how they talk about loans is excellent. It's really, really great. So take some time to become familiar with this website. We're going to look at a federal website. It's only going to address students who are completing the FAFSA application. So if you did the California Dream Act, you might not. So it's a little different if you did the California Dream Act. These loans that we're going to be looking at, you won't see on your financial aid award letter, but California as a state has put together a similar loan system so that you will be seeing loans on your financial aid award letter. They're going to be coming from the state of California or from individuals like UC or CSU systems instead of from the federal government. But yeah, okay, sorry. I'm looking at the questions. I'm going to make sure we address all of these, okay? So keep them coming in. We're going to start with talking about federal/state versus private loans. So this is actually just an embedded browser view of the studentaid.gov website. Like I said, I think this website is just so useful to get used to. Generally, state or federal loans are going to be safer for you than private loans. It is because state and federal loans will always have a fixed interest rate. That means that the interest rate that you receive that you are given when the loan starts will never increase. There's always the risk of that with a private loan. The other is that payments for federal or state loans will never start while you are a student. You will only ever be charged for them after you graduate. It's not always a guarantee with private loans. So you can see the URL here. I recommend that you go into open up another browser while I'm talking. You can view that at the same time. But take a minute and really go through this. And know that just very quickly that federal or state loans are going to be safer financially for you than private loans are. April, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, for students, like Rachel mentioned, don't be afraid of student loans. One of the things that I also tell students is that federal loans have, and she's putting it out there, it's subsidized and unsubsidized. And so when you're looking at being least in debt, is always take out what is needed. Don't take out the entire amount that you're going to be awarded. Look at all of your financial aid award. And I always start with your subsidized. And I think Rachel's going to talk about the reason why.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to point that out because as a student, you get like, oh my God, I'm getting all this loans offered. Like, what do I do? And you have to be smart about how much do you really need? And if at the end you find yourself where you still need more money, the loan is going to be there. So you can always request the extra amount that you didn't take from the institution.
Thank you so much, April. Yeah, sounds like we're right on the same page. It's awesome. It means that I am on the right track. So take a screenshot of this. This is actually also from studentaid.gov. And so, we're talking about loans and layers. First is that federal or state loans will always be safer for you financially than private loans. The next layer is this, the types of federal loans. So there are three major types of federal loans: subsidized, unsubsidized, and plus/parent plus. Subsidized and unsubsidized loans are for you, the student. So you take out the loans in your name and you are ultimately the person responsible for paying them back. Parent loans or plus loans are taken out not by you, the student, but a parent. So they are taken out in a parent's name and it's ultimately the parent's responsibility to pay them back. You can see here that parent loans have a higher interest rate than student loans. So actually, wait, the federal government takes care of this for us. The layers that are how things are listed here are the order in which you should take out loans. Start with subsidized, then look at unsubsidized, and as a kind of final option, look at parent plus, just because of that higher interest rate. Subsidized means that the government pays for your interest while you are in school, so that you will not have interest accumulating while you're in school, and it's going to be less so you have to pay off later. Unsubsidized means that you still don't have to pay anything while you're in school, but you're going to have interest adding up, and so it'll be more to pay off later on. You can also see that the max awards are different for each of them too. So you can receive up to $5,500 in subsidized loans. You can get up to $20,000 in unsubsidized loans. And then those plus loans, it depends. Remember, it depends on the bucket. It depends on how much space is left in the bucket after they've added all these other options in. Here are the main takeaways when I think about loans in general. So those were kind of like the logistics and the basics of loans, but here let's talk about what April was starting to address is loans are scary, but loans come up in many, many different places of our life when we're investing in something that is going to bring long-term benefit for us. So a house, a car, your education, think about all these things as a long-term investment in your future. So loans are not something to be scared of. It's just think of it similar to your making a major purchase for your future. You're purchasing a car, you're purchasing a house, you're going toward purchasing your education. They're meant to be a safety net. So sometimes loans might be necessary, but they're always going to be there for you if you need them. And some loans are better than others. Like I said, subsidized good, unsubsidized less good, parent plus last resort, and private loans last resort after that. And I think of it in this way, is that some borrowing isn't bad. Just like April was speaking to, you will see loans on your financial aid award letter, and you will have the option to take those or not take those at any point in your academic lifespan while you're getting your bachelor's degree. You don't have to take them right away when you are accepting your grants and scholarships. You can get halfway through your fall and say, oh my gosh, I'm drowning in costs right now. I need to take some loan money to help me cover my costs and get through the semester. You're also going to see that you will not be required to take out the full loan amount, that you can take $1,000 out of the $5,000 they offered you, and that's okay. And then just my last kind of note on this is that some borrowing isn't bad. Consider your long-term borrowing goals. When folks get drowning in student debt, that is most likely because they took out student education loans that were kind of veering toward house cost size loans. Some folks can take out 40, 50, 80, $100,000 in loans to cover just their bachelor's degree. But if the loans are kind of more skewed toward car payment size, where it's $1,000, $5,000, even $10,000, those are amounts that are more kind of, closer to purchasing a car, something that's, within a few years and $200 monthly payments, that it's reasonable to pay off. And yes, any questions about this? This is my kind of last slide talking about loans specifically. Cool. Okay, and then just in our kind of, so we're going to spend about 10 minutes looking at some sample financial aid award letters. I think you all, sounds like you have things that you can look at as well. And then trying to make sure we're saving time at the end for questions. Sound good? Okay, we are going to be looking at financial aid award letters for the CSU systems and the UC systems. And yes, oh my gosh, what you can spend your money on. Thank you so much. Someone just asked me, like, what can you spend your financial aid money on? And I totally forgot to address that. Financial aid money, and I'm not including scholarship money in this as well, it is meant for you to survive and thrive as a student. And so it is ultimately up to you to kind of determine what your most successful spending strategy is. But financial aid money is meant for you to kind of cover anything within that cost of attendance. That includes housing and off-campus housing too. It includes your cost of books or the cost of a new computer. If your computer crashed, your financial aid money can be used for that. It can be used for gas or lunch. It's meant to be anything that you need to be successful as a student. How financial aid distribution works, because I really realized that I took that slide out of my typical talk, is that money, so this financial aid award letter that we're about to look at, the money kind of flows through the school first. So the grants and scholarships go to the school. The school takes out what they need to cover your cost of tuition and your fees. If you are living on campus, housing is not covered in that kind of initial kind of fee removal. So just a heads up on that. And then the rest of the money is then distributed to you. And you work with your financial aid office to see how that's distributed to you. Sometimes, every school is different, right? Many of our community colleges right now, that's given to you on a debit card. Some of them set up a direct deposit, which I think is better, right? Don't lose that. Like, it's not a card to lose. And so then with that leftover money after tuition and fee costs have been removed, that's then for you to use for your housing, for your gas, for your textbook purchases, et cetera, et cetera. And I am cruising through the chat questions right now. Great. And I think I'm going to address a lot of these in the next few minutes. So real quick, even though we're saying letters, financial aid letters, they're most likely not coming to you in the mail on a piece of paper. They're most likely somewhere in the student portals that the college is creating for you. So if you apply to CSUs, you have access to your student portal already. And if you haven't done so, it is in your best interest to find that student ID number they sent you, find that email with the directions to set up your portal. And they're called different things. They're called like My Sac State or My CSULA, something like that. My Gator portal, I think is what it's called for SF State. But you will be wanting to find directions on how to access your student CSU portal. This version is a couple years old. They might have updated their platform since then, but generally when you log in to this portal, you're going to see things like a to-do list, which is really awesome. So you can see if they are pending any documents that you need to submit. You can see when enrollment dates open or what orientation dates are available to you. There's going to be a bunch of different pieces of information in here. Somewhere in there, there's going to be an area called finances, and then there's going to be this little button called view financial aid. You might also see money owed in this section. Do not worry. They're not going to take a look at your financial aid first. This might be pending your financial aid distribution. And then this is, like I said, this is a few years old. The platform might have changed, but generally this is, and let me see if I can zoom this for everybody. Sorry, I don't know how to zoom on just, but you're gonna get these slides. You can also Google an image search for CSU Financial Aid Award Letter, and similar kind of versions of this are going to come up. But this is typically what a CSU award letter looks like. They will start with awards based on the whole academic year, then they'll usually do a breakdown by term as well. Awards are distributed by term, so you're not going to get the whole chunk of money before the fall semester starts. You're going to get an award distribution for fall and a separate one for spring. You can see here they break things down into those individual grant or scholarship names, so that you see a line here for the Cal grants, for a Stafford loan, for a Boeing scholarship in this case for this student. And you can see the amount that's offered and then whether or not that student has accepted it. I saw a question in the chat about Cal Grant and whether if someone qualifies at the community college level, whether that qualification will continue. And it's always going to be based on your income, but generally, yes, if you qualify for Cal Grant at the community college level, you will continue to qualify at the CSU or UC level. As long as you stay in California. So like I said, so we haven't really talked about out-of-state institutions too much. The types of aid that we're talking about right now are generally for California students that are continuing to stay in school in California. If you're looking at out-of-state institutions, the types of aid that you're going to see are going to look different and generally be less. So it will be more in loans and less in grants and scholarships. And this is what it could look like when you are in the process of accepting your financial aid. So, oh, is there another application for it? No, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Everything kind of funnels through your FAFSA or your California Dream Act. You can see here what schools will typically do is they will auto award or auto accept grants or scholarships, any kind of free or gift aid, they will auto award to you. And then for loans, they leave that up to you. You can either choose to leave it blank, to accept it, or to outright decline it. And if you do choose to accept, they have a blank box here for what you would like to initially accept, what amount. You can always add more later. And I'm getting a number of questions about this word preliminary. Everybody at this point is going to see this preliminary, or conditional is another word that you might see in your award letters right now. That preliminary and that conditional is based on, and you're going to see that in your acceptances too. It's going to be conditional acceptance, preliminary acceptance. It's all based on them verifying that the information that you put in your financial aid applications is true, and that you maintain all of the satisfactory academic progress that you said that you were going to maintain when you did your application to the institution.
Can I make a comment real quick too?
Yes, please.
Also, just be mindful that the colleges haven't received any additional scholarships from outside agencies. And so one of the things that you all should know is that your financial aid packet is also based on the cost of attendance based on you living on campus or off campus. And you can receive more than what it costs to go to college. And so just be mindful that some students may have got a ton of awards and it actually exceeds more than what it costs. And that's where it also will they'll change some of your financial award packet based on other outside scholarships that they still have not had any information about. If you get cash scholarships, they don't have any record of it, so don't even mention it. So just wanted to mention that.
Rachel, this is Melva at PCC. I have a question. This is where they would list the college foundation grant, right? If the student had received one. My question that I've been receiving is, will those foundation grants be renewed next year? And that's a concern for students that see that as a great support this year, but is that going to come back next year?
And so when you say college foundation, are you talking about offered by their transfer institution,
Yes.
or offered by that they receive at a community college now?
No, like say UCLA offers them a, Bruins Foundation grant. Is that something they don't normally apply for that specifically? It's kind of added to them because they see them as a student, right? That would benefit. And I think I know the answer, but if you could clarify, that'd be great.
And folks are worried that just because it's preliminary, there's a chance that it might be taken away in the new academic year.
No, because it's not one of the federal or state grants. Is that something they have to reapply for next year? Is it renewable?
That's a great question. And I don't know. I think it's year on year, but here's where I think we're gonna look at a UC award letter really quick, and then I'm gonna kind of wrap up and look at, I think my 3 recommendations for all of you students who have questions that are kind of specific to your institutions like this. And I see a number of questions kind of in the direct chat too, that also kind of lead to what my next steps and homework for you all is, because you're seeing things like, I get the Cal grant at my community college, but I'm not seeing it right now on my financial aid award letter kind of things. And so I have homework for you all. So really quick, here's an example of a financial aid award letter from UC Davis. And folks who have been starting to get award letters from the UCs all do this, and it's really annoying because it's a little overwhelming. They always start with the estimated cost of attendance. They always start with how much they expect you to pay, and it definitely looks like a bill to you. And so you can see that this example from UC Davis, again, it goes back to that cost of attendance. So they're trying to explain what they're basing your financial aid off of, and it definitely looks like it's a bill to you. So they have your cost of attendance here, $29,000. Then they have contributions. This is AKA your EFC. This is that expected family contribution number, the $2,750. That is not a bill. It's not an amount you're going to be specifically charged for. It's just more informational. This is what they're basing then the next portion of your award letter on, which is your estimated financial aid. And again, it's kind of broken down into this flurry of grants and scholarships and loans, and they all have different names. But grants will always have grant in the name. Loans will always have loan in the name. And scholarships will always have scholarships. So you'll be able to look for those kind of key terms. Look for the term grant, look for the term scholarship, look for the term loan, in identifying kind of what's free, what is money that you have to pay back. So here is my final slide, and then I'll stop sharing so we can each, I'll see each other's faces a little more easily. But really my kind of big takeaways that I want you to have is to apply the skills that you've learned at your community college to your new school. And you have a head start going into this new transfer institution. And I think you're going to be learning from and hearing from a number of folks who are a couple of steps ahead of you, who've gone through this transition already and have kind of additional takeaways for you, or things that maybe they wish they would have started a little bit earlier. But this is the homework that I have for you now, is this community that you've built at your community college within your MESA program. Start building that at your transfer institutions now, before the semester ends, before the summer starts, because it is going to make your transition so much easier. So those of you who have questions about your financial aid award letters, start talking to those financial aid offices, start making friends with your financial aid office. I know Dr. Traeger is here. Dr. Traeger talks about all the time how like often she was in her physical financial aid office at her transfer institution. And whether you are doing this virtually or in person, start developing those relationships now. It's going to be harder to do at those institutions because they're larger than your community college, but even more important. And this kind of second point kind of leads to it is, I know there's a lot of stuff going on right now. I know there's pandemic and finals and maybe kind of just feel you kind of, there's this unknown, right, about what this next summer and what this next year is going to look like. And I know that we're all kind of in this process of prioritizing right now, thinking like, I don't have time to deal with this right now. I need to put my academics first. When it comes to financial aid, putting blinders on is only going to hurt more. That addressing things sooner rather than later will make sure that you are not missing any deadlines, that you are becoming eligible for any kind of grants or scholarships that you could be eligible for. There's a chance that, you know, additional aid expires or the deadlines end or it's fully distributed before you get a chance to ask a financial aid office. So asking sooner rather than later will only give you more options and better outcomes. So for those of you who are asking like, why don't I see this on here? Like, don't I qualify for more? Like this feels off. Start asking those questions now. And then that kind of goes to my last point is ask more questions. So not every office at a college is as awesome as your Mesa Center. I think you've probably figured this out already at your community colleges. They're fine getting connected, finding, you know, clubs and financial aid offices and advisors that help you navigate those new schools will help with this. But also kind of use your research skills and kind of notice when you feel like you have gaps in information and pursue those gaps. Ask more questions, be persistent in trying to get to the end result that you want. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And Dr. Traeger, Mesa team, how would you like to use this time? We have a few minutes. We can, would you like to open the floor? Would you like folks to continue to put questions into the chat?
Sure.
Yeah, cool.
We can have some question and answer. I know we had some questions in the chat that got addressed, and I know that there were some private questions coming to you. Go ahead. Is there anybody that has any students that have any questions that they'd like to unmute themselves?
Yeah, and I think maybe this is when I think I talked about this a little bit in the beginning. I'm not from a financial aid office, so I definitely talk about financial aid much more from this kind of transfer kind of college admissions approach. So there might be kind of very specific financial aid questions that I can't answer, but maybe someone else in this room could, or that's when I'll say like, start talking to your schools now. Sound good? And did I see someone unmute, or does someone want to raise their hands? Or I can start, oh, you know what? I see Ephraim's question about living off campus if the estimated cost of attendance is lower. Schools, what I typically see, and this is again where I'm looking at Mesa directors or folks who have transferred, generally what I see is that their formulas are not complicated enough to cover the nuances between living off campus and living on campus. I do not usually see a significant change in financial aid based on whether you are living off campus, you state that you're living off campus or on campus. So I don't think there's a need, in my experience, to update that information in your financial aid applications. Great. And so we got another question for my EFC is greater than my cost of attendance. Will I receive any financial aid at all? And that is complicated. I see Gisela shaking their head. And so I think I will say, you know, that is a great example of starting to talk to that financial aid office at your institution now, and really start pursuing external scholarships, because they might making friends with your financial aid office will open doors that might not be, kind of initially seen in your financial aid award letter or application. But then that's where those outside scholarships that come in that are not need based, that are more merit based. When do you, oh, thank you. So I got a private question on when do we get our award letters? Typically, you get your award letter when you receive your offer of admission. And so, like I said, it's not going to be a letter that comes in the mail necessarily. So if you have, so start checking those portals, because even the CSUs are sneaky. They might not even send you an email. It might just be updated one day of like, oh, well, there you go. I'm accepted. And look, that I have a bunch of financial aid. That's cool. So check those portals. If you haven't heard anything, so I think MESA directors, you probably have talked about this with their students already. Generally, CSUs have already started giving your admissions notifications. If you have not heard from a CSU by, today's the 17th, if you haven't heard from them by the end of next week, start contacting those admissions offices. Typically, CSUs kind of lean more toward earlier admission notifications than later. Their student intent to register, so they want to have a commitment from you by May 1st, and typically for the CSUs. UCs are much kind of more spread across the spectrum. So I believe that UC Davis is sending out their admissions offers this week. UC Berkeley is sending theirs out. UC Berkeley and UCLA always have a scheduled admissions announcements. And I think that I'm looking at folks that know this more kind of, I think is UC Berkeley is this Friday and UCLA is next Friday, I think. Does anybody know, or am I flipping them in my head? But UC Berkeley and UCLA will be in the next 2 weeks. If you haven't, and other UCs you should have heard from by now or in this very soon. So if by next Monday you haven't heard from schools outside of UCLA and UC Berkeley because they want to be extra like that, then start contacting admissions offices. MESA directors, anything that you want to add on that?
Students
And
can-
I'm getting,
well,
I'm getting notes about like, I have not gotten my financial aid award letter yet, or I'm seeing that I'm getting a financial aid award based on for an international student and I'm not international, or I've done my DACA, financial aid offices at those institutions. Start talking to them now.
I also want to comment for those who are saying that they're getting international or like sometimes if your parent, the residency for UCs, this usually happens at UCs. If your parent's residency status is not like a US citizen, then they're going to base off of your parent's residency. And so if your parents are not US citizens or permanent residents at the UCs, you will have to fill out an affidavit form so that that gets changed, and then you will be able to get in-state tuition. Even though you are a US citizen, unfortunately for UCs, that's how they function. And so that's one of the things that you have to look at, and you have to act quickly so that you don't panic and then feel like, oh, I have to owe this money. And then when you're looking at the breakdown as far as like your awards letter, I would definitely encourage you to break it down into 2 parts. The indirect cost, which is what you need to enroll and be a student there, which is your tuition and your housing. Those are like, to be a student, you need housing and you need your tuition to be paid for. So those are your direct costs. And then your indirect costs, don't worry as much. And then also the EFC that your parents have to pay, because your parents are helping you out regardless. They're not giving you that amount like directly to you, but every month they're helping you pay bills. And so that's how you're gonna look at your family contribution throughout your academic year. And so when you're looking at the indirect costs, look at your expenses on miscellaneous expenses, your food, all that, that's gonna be indirect costs. And so don't freak out on that cost, because that you'll figure it out as you're a student, that you'll realize, okay, this is how much I'm actually spending on groceries, this is how much I'm spending on gas. So they overestimated on that cost. So I want you guys to do that so that you guys don't freak out on what they estimated. They always overestimate on the cost of there, because it's just better to overestimate, but then you guys will be have a true cost of what it costs for you to be a student there.
So we have one last, what about spring 2020 transfers? And then we'll close out.
Great question. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. So spring 2020 transfers, your kind of timeline on things doesn't, so I think you will be doing your application spring 2022 transfers this summer. The only thing that I would consider doing now is to update your financial aid applications, your DREAM Act or your FAFSA, to list your potential colleges for next year. So the schools that you're considering applying to in your financial aid applications that you have now, you can go back in, you can update them. Or otherwise you will be updating those after you receive your admissions offers. When you get your financial aid award letters from your spring schools, they will be including that just the spring term award in your acceptances.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming to the main session, and thank you so much, Rachel. Definitely
Rachel,
look.
that was awesome.
It
Like I
was
said,
great.
Hey, silver linings. I'm so happy to get the opportunity to meet all of you. I'm going to be hanging back and going through the chat and make sure I answered folks' questions. If not, I'll be responding to your questions right now.
And go ahead and find your links and make your way out to breakout room 1. Thank you so much.
Thank you.